Welcome back to the Terminator Painting Captain Guide. This one, we're going to go through his base. Not too sure how many parts I'm going to break this one into. It's going to be a bit more freeform. Haven't really thought this one through a great deal. So let's ad-lib our way through. First thing I want you to notice is all the sort of different textures and things we've got. So we've got concrete, got some earth. I have no idea what this is. Some sort of Tyranid growth. Got a little bit of rebar. Got the brass casings we did as part of the metal. And with our Screamer Killer. He's a bit small compared to the actual Screamer Killer Mini. So we're going to have to learn how to paint Tyranids in this. I'm going to start with the simplest thing, and I'm going to use Basilicum Grey Citadel Contrast Paint. And paint in all of those concrete bits. I'm not going to be worried about being too careful, because although bases have to look good, that's only in a sort of a 2 foot away sort of thing, because it just draws the eye in. As long as you don't want to paint it better than the miniature, because that's going to take the focus away from it. And then you do also need to make sure that the colour's right. You don't want a colour tone, a palette choice that'll draw attention away from the miniature, because then they're going to notice it's not painted as well. Generally speaking, I mean this in the most broad way possible. Wherever you paint your miniature, so I've used a cool palette for this Ultramarine Captain, blues. There's a little bit of red on his back, but that's on his back. You don't see that immediately. So because I've used a cool palette, I'm going to use a nice warm tones across the base, and that will contrast really well. The risk is if you paint the base in cool tones, the mini would start to merge with it, and your eye wouldn't be quite as attracted. That's a big deal if you want to start winning sort of any sort of painting awards, or just things won't look right. That's Basilicum Grey, done nice and fast. Basilicum Grey, nice and dry. I'm going to leave it at that. I'm not even going to try and highlight it or dry brush it. Again, I'm just trying to get a feel. Now I have my Cygor Brown. This is a very strong contrast paint. This is opaque. If you want a transparent version, I would suggest Wildwood. Same shade, just transparent, not opaque. And I'm going to paint over any areas that are dirt. So that includes this step. This is part of the miniatures, part of the scenic element of the base and the base itself. Paint in brown. I'm not too sure. I think I'm going to use some sort of texture paint. I haven't quite decided yet. Make sure we don't get any of this on the Tyranid Beastie. So this will overpower whatever we put on top of it. Let's dry it off. Onto the Tyranid life form. I'm going to try something I haven't done for a little while. I'm going to try some weird wet blending stuff. So for that I'm going to need Fire Magenta, Magos Purple, and a bit of Lamium Medium to blend them all together. There it is. Paint, medium. I'm going to try the magenta. So magenta's another weird colour, isn't it? Let's just throw that on there and see what happens. I want something really alien looking. But hopefully not too cartoony. I'm mixing lots of Lamium Medium into my brush. So whilst it's still wet, just work it. Start moving contrast paint around as it dries. And get it to flow off areas into other areas. And when you get a big pool of it, wick it away. Get that Magos Purple out. We're going to work that. All those recesses. Well, I have no idea what that'll look like when it's dry, but it's going to be interesting. I'm going to take this purple and throw it on the armour. Chitin. Chitin? Someone correct me in the comments, I'm sure you will. Let me know. It doesn't really matter too much if I've blended these all together. And we're just sort of trying to give a impression now. Let's not forget the whatever the hell this thing is. nice and dry. I am quite happy with how that turned out. I do need to make it lighter. It's not going to stand out enough. So what I need to do is dry brush the concrete, add some scenic elements, and let's punch up this pink. I've got my Iron Rack Skin, one of my favourite paints there. I'm going to mix in the previous paint, magenta. I'm going to get this very strange tone. I'm not even too sure what colour to call that. I'm going to use a technique called overbrushing. This is like dry brushing, but I'm not going to dry the brush. I'm just going to throw it on wherever it lays. So it's a bit wet. But yeah, just doing this, just roughing it out, seeing where it goes, seeing how it looks. Don't worry about being too neat. Or even blending in the edges. See how bad that brush is split apart. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Just go for it. If you put too much on in one area, do what I'm doing now, and just use that as a palette for the rest of it. Okay, that'll do. That will dry a little bit darker. Go from there, see what happens. There it is cured. Very rough, but workable. What I'm going to do is I'm going to throw some more Doomfire Magenta at it. This time I'm going to thin it 50-50 with Lamium Medium. This is still a strong tone. There we can see that coming through. That's okay, so it's going to blend in those edges, those rough overbrushing I just did. That's fine. Again, if you put too much on, just use it as a palette for the rest of it. Let's dry it up. There it is dry. Now we'll do some dry brushing. So you should still have some of the old mixture left. I'm just going to dry brush it in, build up another layer. And the more you apply, the more you work it, the more the paint layers build up. So if it doesn't look opaque enough to start with, just keep going at it. And stop when you think you've hit enough. There. Oh, I think that's a lot better. That's a lot of effort for a base, to be honest. Let's see if it pays off. I'm going to get that Iron Rack Skin and my decent paintbrush. Just define some of these edges out. Just catch edges of these vents on his. See if we can get us some line in just to mark the very top of his ribs. Very nice. I go in with some Magos purple. I'm going to paint some veins of a bulbous head. This is one of my little treats. Most people will never even see it. I like to know it's there. Very similar to painting lightning from the power sword. Sort of one branching origin point. Everything goes outward from there. That's my little detail I'd like to add. Now, as I've got the Magos purple out, let's apply another coat to these chitin areas. Yep. That tongue is sticking up. We're going to go in with some pure Doomfire Magenta. But there are two details left on him I'd like to pick out. He has teeth and he has an eye nestled just here. I'm going to use a little bit of that Mechanica Standard Grey. It hasn't quite dried out on my palette. I've activated again with a little dollop of water. Let's go in. There. This is rock. And that is the wrong colour. Shaded up. The Silicon Grey is quite forgiving. It can go over most other colours. I'm going to grab a yellow for his eye. I've grabbed a Dawn Yellow. And this one has quite good coverage for what I'm about to do. And it's an off yellow as well. Or ice yellow. Yes. I'm going to need my good brush for this one. See if we can. I think it's more sinister to leave them without any irises or pupils. But that's me. I mean, you can paint one in. It would be quite nice if you just put a little black spot to see the eyes rolled up into the skull. He's definitely dead when that happens. We'll have a go at dry brushing the concrete. I've mixed up some just neat iron rack onto my dry brush. I'm just going to use that to catch the edges. This will make it look a bit dusty as opposed to sort of exposed concrete, which is fine. Any sort of neutral tone will work. So you can use a sand colour, a neutral grey, a blue grey. It'll all work to make it look. It will still convince the eye, no matter what you use. This is just a personal preference. I'm going to go back in after dry brushing that, neaten up whatever this thing at the bottom of his base was. For the next bit, I'm going to use some sort of technical paint or texture paint to do these bits of the base where the scenic element joins it. For that, I'm going to use this AK Effect Dark and Dry Crackle. Hit and miss these products. I find I don't normally like to use products where I can't control what's going to happen at the end. I do have to make sure it's thoroughly mixed. Shaking these is not enough. That's why. If you are using these, even the GW ones, get an old coffee stirrer or something in there. Make sure it is thoroughly mixed in, or you will not get the desired effect. There. You can use an old paintbrush to do this, but you will destroy it in the process. I have picked up one of these GW texture tools. I don't even know if they sell these anymore, but these are absolutely brilliant for what they are. Not too sure. It is plastic, not silicone, but it's lasted. And it's quite good at what it does. And it seems to be the thicker you throw this stuff on, the better the effect at the end of the day. Make sure you coat everything, even the areas on the scenic base. Otherwise it won't colour match. The very narrow end. Make sure you got thoroughly all the way to the edges. So you're going to have to leave this to dry for a couple of hours. I wouldn't recommend force drying with a hairbrush or any sort of heat source. The crackle won't quite work. It will do something different. So let's see what this looks like in a few hours. I think we can see here that didn't work very well. There's a very prominent ledge. I do have some crackling, but it's not going to save that. That still doesn't look right to me. So what we're going to do is we're going to use some pumice paste instead. There's a few different versions of this. This is Vallejo's rough grey pumice. You can get it from art stores as well. Any pumice paste will do for this. And Vallejo themselves make about 3 or 4 different versions of the same product. Sort of generic grey inside. So what I do is I'm going to take a good scoop of that and onto a palette. I'm going to take a little bit more than what you think you might need, just in case. That should be more than sufficient. Take your colour of choice. Now I'm going to use this dark wood, any dark brown will do, to match it in with what we've already painted on the Mini's base. A couple of drops of that. It's a contrast equivalent, it's speed paint. And mix that in. Yeah, because it's got a natural grey tone to it, it's not going to take that colour just as well. It will dry darker than it seems, but just add a couple more in there, just to be sure. There's absolutely nothing stopping you putting this on neat and then painting it afterward. I just find this saves a step if it's drying anyway. Using the narrow end. And I use that as a gap filler. Now this stuff will actually cure. There'll be a bit of shrinkage, but mostly it'll cure how you lay it down. So, it won't crackle though. So make sure I'm going to cover up any sort of the crackle paint that was left over. We'll be sort of mixing your textures up and that won't look right. When you finish applying it, just run your finger along the the rim. Take two. Let's see how this turns out. Now that the pumice is dry, you can have a look at it. This time its profile is much better, so it's not sunken in, and we can't tell the difference between the base and the scenic element, which is exactly the look we're after. So run your thumbnail along the edges, just make sure there isn't anything on there that shouldn't be. Here's a little bit. Now, what I didn't mention in the previous part was if you want, this is a much easier way than, much cheaper maybe, more efficient way of using things like Sterling mud. So you can just take that pumice paste and mix in whatever colour you want, rather than just buying 5 or 6 different colours for the same effect. You just have one pot. And to be honest with you, the price, that big pot, is probably only a couple of pounds more expensive than the Sterling mud equivalent. I keep calling it Sterling mud, the texture equivalents from Games Workshop. Okay, but next we'll just dry brush this lightly to bring out some of the detail and paint the rim, and that'll be it. Just taking a little bit of Morghast bone, any bone colour will do though. I'm not using a texture palette for this, I'm just going to go for it on this palette. That feels about right. More of an overbrush than a dry brush. Just very lightly work that texture. Yeah, that's it done. Very simple, very effective. For the rim, it's nice, simple, Vallejo black, a little bit of water. Like I mentioned in the black weapon casings, I prefer Vallejo Army Painter blacks rather than GW. They have better coverage, better performance, as in coming off the brush. Yeah, a little bit cheaper. So I'm just going to paint all the way around the rim. Certainly say that's worth giving it a couple of coats. After doing that first coat, I noticed I have some little specks of that pumice. So again, use the thumbnail, take them off. You find that because it's a bit rubberized, it will peel a little bit, well, quite actually a significant amount of the way under it. We're just going to touch that up with the black again. So 2 or 3 coats of this. Every time, just make sure, go around, check it, make sure nothing's abnormal, nothing's stuck in there that shouldn't be, because we want a nice, perfect black there. Right, this will cut back in when I've done 2 to 3 coats.